Hey everybody, and welcome to this special on the super full moon in Cancer that happens in the 19th degree of Cancer on the 1st of February at 10:09. So yeah, I'm Imani, your holistic karmic astrological life coach, and I'm going to take you on this journey. So this is when the home that you built becomes the cage that you're defending. That's the theme of this full moon in Cancer on the 1st of February. So this full moon in Cancer at the 19th degree isn't here to make you feel safe. It's here to show you where you've been using safety as a prison, where you've been calling control, protection and fear intuition, where the walls you built to keep pain out have been keeping life out too. And you know, full moons happen when the moon opposes the sun, but the moon's also opposing Venus and Mars, all in Capricorn. So this makes this full moon really intense, right? So on one side, there's our need to feel nurtured, be held. On the other hand, there's the world demanding that we perform, achieve, prove our worth through what we produce. And, you know, ultimately, we've been trying to do both whilst doing neither, you know. So this full moon lands at 10:09 p.m. on February the 1st, bringing everything that we've been avoiding about our home life, our family, our sense of safety and belonging straight to the surface. So everything, fourth house, coming to the surface, and Cancer's ruled by the moon, so it's really an emotional full moon as well. But we're getting that grounded because obviously the sun's in Capricorn, bringing that grounded, and we've got Venus and Mars all there as well. So as I said, the patterns that we've been defending are being brought to the surface under this full moon of releasing Cancer, right? And the emotional labor, the work that we keep doing, that's actually just you abandoning yourself, you know, to keep everyone else comfortable, codependency and all of that, people pleasing, being brought to the surface. And Saturn and Neptune are both squaring from Pisces, squaring the moon, adding a layer of nothing feels solid and reliable right now, and everything can be confusing, but people or the world is still trying to make you feel like you have to hold it together, and you expect to hold it together, you know, and you can just feel exhausted from trying to figure out what's real, what's your responsibility and what you've absorbed, because your nervous system maybe, you know, learned early in life that feeling everything keeps you safe, you know. But here's the truth, you can't heal in the same environment that made you sick. Remember, you can't heal in the same environment that made you sick, right? And yeah, it can be hard to distance ourselves from, you know, maybe it's friends, families, lovers and stuff like that. And, you know, be like, I'm pulling myself in a new environment so I can heal. I believe that ultimately, you know, we have to get to the stage when we have to try and accept that we can't control other people, but it can be hard to heal when people refuse to do things like respect your boundaries and stuff. So that's why sometimes it's best to try and remove yourself or distance yourself from the situation, but it can be harder done in theory. And yeah, it's easier done in theory than practice. That's what I'm trying to say. But ultimately, you know, this full moon is reminding us that we can't heal in the same environment that made you sick. And I've learned that in my life as well. So I agree with that. But I also agree that, you know, sometimes we have to try to heal when we are around people who we don't particularly want to be around as well, you know. But ultimately, you can't grow roots in soil that was never meant for you, you know. And you can't keep calling it home just because it feels familiar, you know. And sometimes, you know, it can be harsh, but, you know, those who we want to love us, like maybe our parents, our family, whatever, can't love us in the ways that we want. So we have to try and accept this and love them for who they are because we love them, right? Or, you know, sort of like keep our distance, you know, one or the two. I meant to say one of the two, you know, we have to make a choice. And sometimes the most radical act of self-love is admitting that the life you built doesn't fit anymore. If you've been feeling restless, you know, untethered, or like something's got to give, this is giving. The moon's not asking permission. She's here to crack open whatever you've been holding on to too tightly. And the only way through it is to let it break. Not because breaking's the goal, but because what's on the other side is the version of you who stopped performing, belonging, and started building it for real, you know. And I know it's cliche, but sometimes the, you know, friends are the family we get to choose for ourselves. And this doesn't mean, you know, cut off your family if they're okay. I'm not a supporter of that, you know. And sometimes we have to try and look reasonable. Our parents, sometimes they only had the tools that they had, you know, their parents, their knowledge, their society they brought up in as well, you know. But if they keep on refusing to respect your boundaries, sometimes you will have to, you know, keep your distance, at least sometimes in the extreme, cut yourself off, you know. It's about, you know, not holding on too tight. And, you know, sometimes we have to let things break, right? Not because breaking's the goal, but because what's on the other side, as I said, is the version of you who stopped performing, belonging, and started building it for real. The authentic you is on the other side of your comfort zone, right? So this is a full moon about coming home to yourself, even if it means leaving a home you thought you needed, even if it means disappointing people, even if it means admitting you've been pretending for years. The moon sees you. She knows what it costs you to survive, you know, and she's asking if you're ready to stop surviving and start living, right? So now I'm just going to talk about the sensor info of the moon, you know, the degrees and what's happening in terms of aspect. So the super full moon is when, you know, the moon's at its brightest, and the full moon in Cancer is bringing emotional intensity. At the 19th degree of Cancer, that's increased emotional sensitivity, especially around our family dynamics, relationships. The sun's in the 19th degree of Capricorn, so this brings ambition, responsibility, and public achievement into our focus. And as I said, it's exact at 10:09 p.m. GMT time on the 1st of February 2026, and that's, you know, the maximum emotional charge at this time for the moon. And there's a 72-hour window from January the 31st through to the 2nd of February, which is the peak integration period for emotional release and insight. So it's best to do rituals and stuff then, but I'm going to talk about the rituals and stuff in about 30 minutes, so hold tight. So the key themes of this moon are home versus career, emotional needs versus external demands, nurturing versus achievement, softness versus structure, you know, routine, and our private self versus our public persona, our social mass, right? So the moon is making an opposition to the sun and to Venus as well, where our emotional relating meets material worth. And the moon also opposes Mars, and this is when anger and our assertion in relationships can kind of be separating, you know, and it wants us to think about what is actual anger and aggression and what's assertion, because, you know, we can assert our needs without being angry. Are we being angry, or are we just asserting our boundaries? You know, this is what the moon opposes. Mars wants us to question. The moon also is in opposition to Mercury, so it wants us to communicate our feelings and think about facts, you know, but, you know, not to neglect facts, you know, because it's feelings versus facts, but just to be truth about our feelings. And sometimes our feelings are not facts, right, but they're real for us, right? So the moon opposing Mercury is wanting us to communicate our feelings versus just facts and logic, right? And the moon also makes a sextile square to Saturn, so we can feel a restriction of our emotional expression, our ability to express our feelings, right? Because of this aspect, the moon's also making a sextile square to Neptune, so this can bring confusion about our boundaries. Also, the moon sets style in the ascendant, so this allows us to integrate our emotional self with our overall identity, right? And the sun's trine to the ascendant allows us to apply authentic self-expression, supporting us to do that. And the moon semi-sextile to the midheaven helps us to separate our home life from our career, right? So this is really, really good. And the sun's quincunx to the midheaven allows us to bring the changes that we need to balance our career needs and our home life, right? And then that Sakra that the moon's in is Elisa, which is bringing the serpent energy, Kundalini, our energetic awakening, psychological depth, transformation, and through emotional intensity. And that was psychological depth, not death, right? And the Sabin symbol that the moon's in is a priest performing a marriage ceremony. So this is all about sacred union, commitment to ourselves and others, witnessing life and making things official. And the Sabin symbol for the sun is a child about 5 with a huge shopping bag, carrying more than, the child can handle. So this puts a spotlight on, the ways that we take on responsibility that's beyond our ability, right? And how our innocence meets demand, and putting a spotlight on, maybe when we was children, or even now, the ways that people expect us to carry responsibilities that are not our own. And on the collective level, it's wanting us to release the performance of emotional stability and let ourselves actually feel what's been building inside of us, and to release our emotions, right? And in terms of shadow work, it's putting a spotlight on where we've been using caretaking as control and calling it love. And to integrate, we can name one feeling that we've been performing instead of having, and let ourselves have it for real. So maybe you've been performing self-love and not actually having it. So, thinking about how you can bring more self-love into your life. So for you guys who like the summary version, that was it. And now I'm going to go in depth, looking more at this full moon in focus, right? So as I said, the moon is in the 19th degrees of Cancer, and it's all about home, mother, and the trap of trying to control everything, right? So as I said, the moon's in the home sign of Cancer, which means emotions are already at the maximum value before we even add the full moon intensity, right? And Cancer's the sign of home, family, mother, nurturing, safety, and all the things we learned early that were conditional, right? Such as all the things we learned that we had to earn, such as our parents' affection, love and stuff, all the things we learned to provide for others whilst abandoning ourselves as well. And at the 19th degrees of Cancer, this full moon sits in their Lisa Nakshatra, ruled by Mercury, but carrying the energy of the serpent, Kundalini, psychological depth, the parts of ourselves that coil in the dark, waiting for the right moment to strike or transform. So Elisa's energy is not gentle, right? It's the Nakshatra that sees manipulation, understands emotional power dynamics, and knows exactly where everyone's wounds are, right? It's also the Nakshatra that can heal through that knowledge if you're willing to stop using it to protect yourself and start using it to liberate yourself, to free yourself, right? So the Sabin symbol for the 19th degrees of Cancer is a priest performing a marriage ceremony. There's a witnessing happening here, a sacred commitment being made official, someone standing between two people saying, I see this union and I bless it. But here's the question this full moon's asking: what are you marrying yourself to? What are you committing yourself to, right? What commitment have you been performing that was never actually yours? What vows did you take on that you never agreed to? Cancer's gift is deep emotional knowing and fierce protection of what matters, but Cancer's trap is confusing emotional labour with love, confusing managing everyone else's feelings with safety, confusing the familiar with the sacred. And at this full moon, with the Sun, Venus, Mars and Mercury all opposing from Capricorn, you're being asked to see where the marriage ceremony you've been performing is actually a prison, right? A prison sentence that you've been calling home, and the moon in Cancer wants to feel, wants to nurture, wants to create a space so safe that everyone can rest. But when that desire meets the world, and often a family system that punishes vulnerability and rewards performance, Cancer learns to perform care whilst feeling nothing, learns to manage everyone else's emotional reality whilst disconnecting from her own, learns to be the container, you know, the space for everyone else's pain whilst having nowhere to put her own pain, right? Does this sound familiar? So it's wanting us to look at the ways that we neglect ourselves, neglect our personal care. Maybe, you know, it can be hard, you know, time, demands, but you know, I believe we all can spare at least 2 or 5 minutes to ourselves, and a lot of the time we self-care or self-soothe in Neptune's negative energy, right, which is the addiction, so overindulgence in drugs, alcohol, Netflix, chilling, too much excessive staying awake, binging, all of that negative addictive stuff, toxic relationships that stop us from healing our wounds and keeps us in this comfort zone, but also keeps us in this reality that everything's going to be crap. And you know, we are living in a very testing time right now. The world is getting crazier and more divided by the minute, but the only place that we can try and seek unity, because I believe if we try to find unity within ourselves, and every person who is able to does that, then we can spread that outwards, right, and that will become the reality. But if we all keep on perpetuating, continuing this, like, you know, kind of divided blame kind of culture, then we're just gonna keep on creating that, right? So I believe everyone who can take the responsibility to handle their emotions, right, and of course be assertive with it. Being loving and kind doesn't mean you let people walk over you and harm you in any way, nor does it mean you harming others, and calling it self-love as well, right? So this full moon is bringing up every moment where you smiled when you wanted to scream, every time you said I'm fine when you're drowning, every family gathering where you played a role instead of being the person, every relationship where you made yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. And we've just had the big Christmas season about a month ago now, because we're in the 1st of February, so many of you may have had to perform, and maybe you're like, that's it, I'm not going to do it, you know, at Easter or next Christmas or Thanksgiving. You know, enough is enough. So ultimately, full moon in Cancer is not asking you to fix it, because we can't fix others, we can only ever fix ourselves, right? She's asking you to stop pretending it's working. She's asking you to stop defending the case just because you built it with your own hands. She's asking you to admit that the version of safety you've been clinging to has been costing you your actual life, right? Cancer rules the 4th house, home, family roots, foundation, the private self, and this full moon's illuminating, putting a spotlight on, focusing on where your foundation's been built on someone else's needs, where your roots have been tangled in patterns that predate you, you know, hurt you, harm you, where home has been a place you perform rather than a place you rest, and you know, where roots have been tangled in patterns that predate you, that came from ancestors, just been passed down from ancestors and stuff, and you've been just like, oh, this is the way our family does it, or your family, or you know, society tells you this is the way it's done, so you gotta keep on doing it. But no, you know, everybody's allowed to invent something, right? You don't have to just continue in a pattern, especially if it's toxic, but that doesn't mean you get rid of everything, because a lot of the time our family systems, the language, the theories are good, right? You know, love and protect and respect, you know, our elders, our parents and stuff like that. But what happens when your parents don't respect you or themselves, and then you use them as a role model, and then you know, end up doing the same self-destructive things that they have done, right? So it's about, you know, separating what's actually good patterns and what's negative patterns, but also, you know, not just throwing things out because, oh, my mom said it and I don't like my mom anymore, so it must be all bad, right? So the invitation here is to start making home in people and places that require you to abandon yourself to belong, to stop calling it safety when it's actually your familiar pain, to name what you actually feel instead of what you think you're supposed to feel, to let the marriage ceremony be real this time, a commitment to your own emotional truth, witnessed by the part of you that's been waiting for permission to stop pretending. This isn't about burning it all down, it's about admitting what's already ash, what's already, you know, just ash, right? Not even flames, just ash. Just you touch it and it's just dusty and it leaves black residue in your hand. It's not solid, right? It's about seeing clearly what you've been too afraid to look at. It's about choosing yourself even when, especially when it disappoints people, even when it disrupts the system, even when it means you have to rebuild from scratch, right? Now I'm going to talk about the aspects in more detail that the moon and the sun are making at the time of this full moon in Cancer. So I'm going to start with the tightest aspect first, because that's where the energy is most concentrated, breaking it down aspect by aspect, right? Because the tightest aspects are the ones that we feel most intensely, especially during the 72-hour full moon window from the 31st of January, right, to the 2nd of February. So we've got the moon making a semi-sextile to the midheaven, and this is the tightest aspect in the entire chart of the full moon, right? But it's already separating, which means its peak just before the full moon was exact, and the midheaven at 19th degrees of Gemini represents our career, our public reputation, our life direction, what we're here to build in the world. And the semi-sextile is a 30-degree aspect, which is subtle, but it requires constant changes. So the moon in Cancer touching the midheaven in Gemini creates tension between our emotional needs and professional demands, between wanting to feel safe at home and needing to be seen as competent publicly, right? So this aspect means that maybe because it's separating, that we're going to make a choice consciously or unconsciously about, our home. If we've been prioritizing one over the other, if you've said yes to work when your body said no, or maybe, at this time you're just going to admit you can't keep performing and something's got to give, right? And the question this aspect asks is, can you build a career that doesn't require you to abandon your emotional reality, your emotional truth, the fact that you may be in turmoil, chaos inside, you've got things to resolve, you need to nurture yourself within and look after some things before you can move on, right? The sun is also making a quincunx to the midheaven, so the sun in Capricorn wants us to build, achieve and be seen as successful, right? And it's demanding an adjustment between our identity and our life direction, right? Because the quincunx is a 150-degree aspect that brings awkward, uncomfortable truth that requires us to reset, to change our approach, right? And the midheaven in Gemini brings communication, flexibility and mental agility, flexibility as well. And when these two are in the quincunx, they don't quite fit. What we've been building doesn't match where we're heading, right? Or who you're becoming doesn't fit the path you're on. So maybe you've noticed a misalignment, or maybe you just realize that the career you're building doesn't actually want the persona you're becoming, right? Or the life direction you're heading in requires you to keep performing in ways that are killing you. This full moon's here to make that discomfort conscious and give you permission to change direction, even when you've already invested so much. And this is one of my this is one of my biggest flaws, because sometimes it can be hard to quit when you've invested something and you want to continue it, but it's not working right. Sometimes we just have to let things go. Sometimes we have to say, I'm getting rid of that so I can make room for the new, right? So the moon is making a sextile square to Saturn at the time of this full moon as well. So Saturn's pressure on our emotional reality is increasing through the full moon window, and Saturn's in Pisces is all about emotional responsibility, boundaries in relationships, and where we've been over functioning, basically doing too much. And the sextile square creates friction, tension, friction. You want to rest but you feel guilty. You want to feel but you think you should be stronger. You want to support but you believe that you should be able to handle it alone. Saturn's lessons are always about maturity, and in Pisces that maturity is emotional. It's learning that having boundaries doesn't make you cold, that saying no doesn't make you selfish, that admitting you're overwhelmed doesn't make you weak. But Saturn can also be the voice of the inner critic, and the sextile square to this full moon can make Saturn sound like your mother telling you to stop being so dramatic, or your father telling you your feelings don't pay the bills. So the work here is to distinguish, tell the difference between healthy discipline and internalized oppression, between legitimate responsibility and carrying shit that was never yours to carry, right? And the sun makes a semi-square to Saturn as well. So the sun's getting the same pressure from Saturn that the moon is, which means your sense of self, your identity, your direction in life, all of it is being tested by Saturn. It's is this real, or are you just a performing energy, right? And the semi-square is a 45-degree aspect, minor but irritating, like a stone in your shoe that you can't ignore, right? It's irritating, it's hurting your big toe or the sole of your feet or wherever it is, right? And the sun in Capricorn already carries Saturn's energy, because Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, right? And in modern astrology, Uranus and Saturn co-rule Capricorn. So this aspect is doubling down on the pressure to achieve, produce and prove your worth through external success. But Saturn in Pisces is saying, okay, but at what cost? Okay, but are you actually happy? Okay, but when's the last time you felt anything real? And the sun semi-square Saturn applying means that this pressure's building. You may feel it as exhaustion that won't lift, as a heaviness in your chest that you can't explain, as a voice asking, is this it? And the answer this full moon wants you to hear is no, this isn't it. And you're allowed to want more than survival. You're allowed to want a life that feels good, not just looks good, right? The moon's also making a sextile square to Neptune, and Neptune's in Pisces, and this is adding confusion to the emotional intensity. The moon in Cancer already struggles with boundaries, and Cancer absorbs everyone's feelings, takes on everyone's pain, and loses itself in the process. And Neptune sextile square the moon in Cancer makes this worse, right? You cannot be sure about what you feel versus what you absorb. Other people's feelings, are they my feelings or are they theirs? What's going on? You can also not be sure about what's your responsibility versus what you're carrying, because your nervous system learned that feeling everything keeps you safe, right? As I said in the beginning. And Neptune can offer escapism here, because that's what Neptune can make us do. At the highest, it can take us to the highest spiritual heights. At the lowest, it can take us into the depths of darkness and the dips, and right, numbing ourselves out by scrolling, binging, dissociating, anything not to feel the fullness of what's coming up emotionally. That's what Neptune tempts us to do on the negative side. But as I said, Neptune can also offer surrender, letting go of control, trusting the process, releasing the grip on outcomes and other people, right? That you were never meant to manage, and it can be hard when it's our love or our family, our children, but ultimately, the only thing that anyone can do is control or manage themselves, right? So Neptune's confusion increases because of the full moon's window and intensity, right? We can kind of just feel like we're losing our mind right now, like nothing makes sense, like we can't trust our own perception, what we're thinking, that Neptune is dissolving our old routines and making everything confusing. And that's good, because that's what Neptune's meant to do, break down our illusions, right? But it's also scary because it's dissolving our comfort zone as well. So the work is surrendering the fantasy of control without surrendering yourself, and coming to the realization, as I said, we cannot control anything but ourselves. And even that's hard to do, because we've all got a lot going on, different sides of ourselves, personalities struggling to come to the surface, right? So it's all about finding that balance. So the sun also is making a semi-square to Neptune. So again, our sense of identity, our life direction, what we thought we were building, all of it is being questioned, because as I said, Neptune dissolves certainty, right? And the sun is adding to the confusion, in the semi-square to Neptune, and it's making us doubt what we thought was solid. What if none of this is real may come to our mind, and the sun in Capricorn, which wants clarity and routine and discipline and structure and measurable progress and achievement, bloody hates that question, what if none of it is real? What do you mean it's not real? Capricorn's like, it's the earth, it's grounded, of course it's real. But sometimes doubt's the gift, and that's what Neptune energy, reminds us of. Sometimes, what if none of this is real? Is is the question that finally lets you admit you've been performing life, performing a life that was never actually yours, that you've been building someone else's dream, that you've been chasing external markers of success whilst your soul's been screaming, this isn't it, this isn't it. This isn't it, and the Sun semi-square Neptune applying means that this doubt is intensifying, and the invitation is not to make it go away, it's to let it show you what needs to die, what you need to let go of, toxic thoughts, and not all of the toxic thoughts, bringing more positive thoughts or balanced thoughts, letting go of toxic habits, which can be hard when we're addicted to stuff or just used to doing things. It's our comfort zone, right? Letting go of toxic relationships and all of that. It's here to show us what needs to die so something truer can be born. That's what this aspect's doing. And the moon sets out to descendant is creating and bringing more ease between our emotional reality and how we present ourselves to the world. So this, we've got Neptune and Saturn bringing chaos. So the moon sets out to descendant is a nice gentle energy, allowing us and making it easier for us to show up authentically as we are, to let our vulnerability be visible, to start performing strength when we actually need support. And it's asking us, and it allows us to be honest. We find it easier to be honest about what we need, easier to let our mask drop, right? Easier for us to ask for help without apologizing or, being reluctant to accept it or apologizing for needing it, right? At times we can get lost in other people, shape-shifting to fit, disappearing into what's needed. But the Cancer moon says, no, your needs matter too. Your feelings are valid too. You're allowed to take up space too, right? The work here is receiving that permission and actually using it. So some of you may reach it to a friend or a lover or a colleague. For some of you, it'd be like a organization like Mind or the Samaritans in the UK, that can help you. The Sun is also making a trine to the Ascendant. So again, Capricorn wants to build something real, something that lasts, something that matters, right? It making it, once again, the Sun's trying to the Ascendant, easier for our public self and our authentic self to align. Virgo Ascendant wants to be a service, to create beauty, to touch something beyond the material, right? And when these two work together, we can build a life that's both grounded and sacred, both practical and soulful, both ambitious and compassionate. And it allows us to basically create things in the world, this energy that actually reflect who you are beneath the performance, but only if you start trying to be what you think you should be and start being what you actually are. Only if you let the full moon show you where the performance ends and the person begins. Only if you trust that who you actually are is enough, more than enough, right? Without the mass and the mismanagement and the constant over functioning. So the moon also makes an opposition to Mars as well. So this brings tension between our assertion, our need to assert our boundaries and emotional safety, right? And Mars in Capricorn's anger is controlled, professional, weaponized, and Cancer's moon anger is overwhelmed, reactive, and protective. So Mars in Capricorn says, channel your anger into productivity. Cancer moon says, I'm too hurt to be productive. I'm too hurt to produce and be productive. I just need to cry. And when these two oppose, you end up either over functioning your way through pain or collapsing into it, right? So because this energy is separating, for some of you this means that you've just navigated a moment where anger and vulnerability collided, or it will collide underneath this full moon, and you will either explode or implode, whether you said the thing or swallowed it. You may say what you mean or you may swallow it. Explode, say it, implode, swallow it. And the full moon is here to show you what that costs, right? To let you see where your anger's been protecting you from feeling, or where your feelings have been protecting you from taking action, and to ask, what if you don't have to choose? What if you could feel deeply and more powerfully? What if anger and tenderness weren't enemies, right? And the Sun's conjunction to Mars, with the Sun and Mars in Capricorn, puts your identity and your drive in alignment. But in Capricorn, that drives restlessness, right? This conjunction separating means you've just made a push, just for something, just tried to willpower your way through. And the full moon's here to ask, how's that working? Are you closer to what you actually want, or just more exhausted? Have you built something real, or just kept moving so you don't have to feel? The separating orb suggests the push is done. Now comes the integration. Now comes the honest look at whether what you have been building is actually worth the cost, right? Whether the life you're driving towards, motivating yourself, the goals you're chasing are the ones you actually want to live in. Whether you're moving towards something or just running from what you're afraid to feel. And the moon in Cancer's here to show you that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is just to stop. Yeah, maybe you've been putting years into this one thing, but is it bringing returns? Maybe you just need to stop, and this can not just be a career or educational goal. It could be a relationship, a personal project, you know. So it's asking us, this full moon in Cancer, to have a real good look at what we need to let go of in our life, right? And the moon is also making an opposition to Venus, so this brings tension between our emotional needs and relationship patterns. And Venus in Capricorn loves with conditions, such as I love you if you're successful, if you're stable, if you're impressive, if you meet my standards. And the Cancer moon loves without conditions, such as I love you because you exist. I hold you whilst you fall apart. I nurture you even when you're a mess. But when you've been conditioned that love's something you earn, Cancer moon learns to abandon its own needs to meet Venus in Capricorn standards, right? So you may notice where you've been performing in relationships under this energy, where you've been making yourself acceptable instead of available, where you've been trying to earn love instead of receiving it, where you've been giving from depletion instead of overflow. And the full moon's here to show you that love that requires you to abandon yourself isn't actually love. It's a transaction, and you're allowed to want more, right? And the Sun's also making a conjunction to Venus as well. So the Sun and Venus together in Capricorn puts your identity and your values in alignment. But in Capricorn, that alignment's around achievement, status and external validation, right? And the conjunction separating means you've just made a choice about this, about whether your worth is tied to what you produce or whether you're valuable simply because you exist. And, you know, it's also bringing to our awareness about whether beauty is something controlled and acceptable or something wild and real, and whether love's conditional or free. So it wants us to see clearly what that choice has cost us, right? Whether we thought love is conditional, or if it's free, or if beauty is something controlled and acceptable, or something that's wild and real, you know. So it's, you know, the question between, you know, is beauty putting on loads of makeup to, you know, sort of like be what society tells us to be, or is beauty someone who's able to just let their natural self be and love themselves for who they are, even if society says, well, you look a mess because it's not conventional beauty, not traditional beauty, what we say is beauty, right? So it wants us to look out, you know, and it's showing us where performing worthiness has kept you from actually feeling worthy, and to offer you a different path, one where your values inbuilt, it's inherent, right? Not earned, it's just, you know, because you're you, and one where you're enough before you do anything to prove it, right? And the moon's opposition to Mercury creates tension between how we feel and how we communicate, between what our body knows and what our mind tries to make logical, between emotional truth and strategic communication. So as I said, the Cancer moon wants us to speak from feeling, and the Capricorn Mercury wants us to speak from strategy. Cancer moon says, this is how I feel, and it doesn't have to make sense. But Capricorn Mercury says, but if you say it like that, people won't take you seriously, right? So you may find yourself struggling to articulate what you feel, to say what you feel, or using too many words to explain something that's actually quite simple, or over justifying your needs because you don't trust they're valid on their own. The word here is learning that your feelings don't need a logical explanation to be real, that you don't have to make a case for your own experience, that sometimes because I feel it is reason enough, right? Okay, so now I'm just going to talk a bit more about the deeper astrological context of this full moon in Cancer. Then I'm going to talk about the Sabian symbols in more depth as well. So yeah. Okay, so as I said, the moon's at the 19th degree of Cancer, and this falls in the Elysian Nakshatra, which spans from the 16th degree, 40 minutes, to the 30th degrees of Cancer, right, in Vedic astrology. And Elysia is ruled by Mercury, and its deity is the Nagas. The serpent guards the Kundalini energy, the cold power waiting to awaken within each and every one of us, right? And Elysia is the 9th chakra out of the 27, and it carries the emotional intensity of Cancer, but also adds a psychological depth that can be proper uncomfortable. So this is the Cancer that sees your wounds, knows exactly where you're vulnerable, and either uses that knowledge to heal you or manipulate you depending on its level of consciousness. So in terms of the Pada calculation for this moon, the moon at the 19th degrees of Cancer falls in Pada 1 of the Elysian Nakshatra, which has the Navamsa Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter. So it carries the Sagittarius energy through the Cancer lens, which creates a drive to grow, expand emotionally, to seek, look for meaning in feeling, to find wisdom through vulnerability. And Jupiter's influence here makes the emotions philosophical. You're not just feeling, you're trying to understand why you're feeling. You're not just hurting, you're looking for the lesson in the hurt. But the trap of Pada 1 Elysia is using that philosophical framework to bypass the actual feeling, turning pain into a lesson before you actually feel it. And the gift of Pada 1 of Elysia is that it can find meaning in the pain once the pain's been felt, can take the wound and turn it into medicine, can use emotional intensity as motivation for transformation. But first you got to stop explaining and start feeling. First you got to stop teaching and start learning. Elysia's shadow is manipulation, control, using emotional insight as a weapon. Its gift is healing, transformation, turning poison into medicine. And this full moon in Pada 1, Elysia's asking, which one are you doing? Are you using your emotional intelligence to heal or to control? The Nagas represent Kundalini energy, the cold power at the base of the spine that when awakened transforms your entire being. But Kundalini awakening isn't gentle, it burns through everything that's false. It forces you to feel everything you've been avoiding. And this full moon in Elysia's offering you that same intensity, not because it wants to hurt you, but because it wants to wake it up. So yeah. So now I'm just going to talk a bit more in depth about the Sabian symbols, as I said. So the symbols that tell the story of this full moon. So the moon at the 19th degrees of Cancer, which is a priest performing a marriage ceremony. So as I said earlier, there's someone standing between two people, witnessing their union, making it sacred, making it official. The priest is the one who says, I see this commitment and I bless it. The priest performs the ceremony, speaks the vows, legitimizes what's being joined. But here's what the symbol's really asking at this full moon. What commitment are you witnessing in your own life? What union are you making sacred? And more importantly, are you the priest blessing someone else's marriage whilst your own soul's screaming out for attention? This symbol is about witnessing, ceremony, sacred commitment. It's about making something official that's been building. It's about the moment when private becomes public, when intention becomes vow, when what you've been feeling becomes what you are declaring, but it's also about the role you play. Are you always the witness, never the one being witnessed? Are you always holding space for everyone else's unions whilst, your own needs go unmet? Are you always performing the ceremony, blessing the commitment, making it feel sacred for them whilst abandoning yourself in the process? The priest stands between two people. That's the role, that's the position, between, not within, not part of, between. And at this full moon, you're being asked, what if you stopped standing between and started standing for? What if you stopped witnessing everyone else's sacred unions and started making your relationship with yourself sacred? What if the ceremony you need to perform is the one where you commit to your own emotional truth, witnessed by the part of you that's been waiting for you to choose yourself? The marriage ceremony requires vows, promises, I will, I do, till death do us part, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. These are the words that bind. These are the promises that create the union. And this full moon's asking what vows you've been keeping that you never actually agreed to, what promises you've been honouring that were made by a version of you who didn't know that they was allowed to say no. What commitments have you been performing because you thought that's what love looks like, when actually it's just been abandonment dressed up as devotion, self-rejection dressed up as devotion? Here's the ceremony this full moon wants you to perform. Stand in front of a mirror, look yourself in the eyes and say the vows you've been waiting someone else to say to you, to say to yourself. Say to yourself, I see you, I witness you, I bless this union between who you've been and who you are becoming. I commit to honouring your needs, your feelings, your truth, even when it's inconvenient, even when it disappoints people, even when it means everything has to change. I promise to stop abandoning you for the comfort of others. I vow to make your emotional reality sacred, witness, legitimate. That's the marriage ceremony that matters. That's the commitment that transforms life. And the sun is also at the 19th degrees of Capricorn, and as I said earlier, the Sabian symbology is a child of about 5, age 5, with a huge shopping bag. So as I said, a child maybe 5 years old, still small, still innocent, still supposed to be playing, carrying a shopping bag that's too big, too heavy, too much for someone that age to handle. So this brings our inner child into the spotlight, right? And thinking about the baggage that we was told to carry as young children. And in the imagery, the bag's dragging on the ground, the child struggling, the child straining, but the child keeps carrying it because that's what children do. They take on what the adults can't hold. They carry what they're given. They assume responsibility that was never meant to be theirs. They prove they're worthy by being useful beyond their years. This is the image opposing the moon. This is the energy creating the tension. This is what the world's been asking you to do, to carry more than you're meant to carry, hold more than your capacity allows, take on responsibility that exceeds your resources, and do it with a smile, because that's what good children do. That's what responsible adults do. That's what love looks like, right? Wrong. That's what trauma bonding looks like. That's what codependency looks like. That's what happens when a child learns their worth is measured by what they can handle, not by who they are inherently, right? The child is the symbol that doesn't know the bag's too heavy, right? The child in the symbol doesn't know that. We didn't know that as children, right? The child just knows they've been given the bag, right, and they're expected to carry it, right? The child doesn't know they're allowed to put it down, doesn't know they're allowed to say this is too much, doesn't know they're allowed to ask for help, doesn't know that needing support isn't the same as failing, doesn't know that their value isn't conditional on their capacity. And if that child's still living inside of you, and you know that child, your inner child, we've all got an inner child, it's still living inside of you, then this full moon is here to tell your inner child that it can put the bag down now, that it was never meant to carry it alone, You were never supposed to bear this weight. It was never your responsibility in the first place. Look at what you've been carrying. The emotional labor for your entire family, maybe for some of you, the responsibility for everyone else's feelings for others, the weight of making sure everyone's okay whilst you're barely holding on, you know. The pressure to achieve, produce, perform, prove that you're worth the space you take up, right? The belief that if you just try hard enough, if you just love enough, if you just give enough, then maybe finally you'll be enough. That's the shopping bag. That's what you've been dragging behind you since you were too young to know that you had a choice. That's the weight you picked up before you even had the language to say, this isn't mine, right? So this symbology is really driving it home that at the time of this full moon in Cancer, it's time to let go of the things or start or continue that work, right? And getting real about your ability and what you are actually responsible for, which is, of course, if you've got children, you're responsible for them until when they get to a certain age. That's not what this full moon is saying. But it's saying, you know, once they get into adults, what are you really responsible for? You know, can you really be responsible for another adult's actions? Of course, some adults have, you know, special needs. And of course, that's when, you know, we have to be responsible for them to a certain point. But we have to also remember to take care of ourselves first, right? I know there's nuances to everyone's situation, so you know, I don't want to be insensitive because that's not what it's all about. Ultimately, the message of this full moon is to take care of yourself whilst taking care of others. You are somebody too, right? So Saturn at the 5th degree of Pisces, that has the Sabian symbology, a church bazaar. So a church bazaar is a community gathering, people coming together, tables set up with goods for sale, volunteers manning the stalls, you know, the tables, whatever, everybody contributing what they can, and the church hosting this exchange of resources, this marketplace of community care, right? It's wholesome, it's communal, it's service orientated. But here's what Saturn in Pisces at the time of this full moon is asking you. Are you giving because you want to, or because you're terrified of what happens if you don't? Are you volunteering because it fills you up, or because you're trying to earn your place in the community? Are you, you know, tending, manning the store because you believe in the mission, or because saying no makes you feel guilty? Saturn rules boundaries, structure, responsibility. In Pisces, Saturn's asking where your boundaries have dissolved, where your structures become formless, where your sense of responsibility has turned into martyrdom. The church bazaar symbol shows service, contribution, community, but it also shows the expectation that everyone participates, everyone gives, everyone shows up. And if you're someone who learned early that your belonging was conditional on your usefulness, then the church bazaar isn't a choice, it's an obligation you can't refuse without risking exile, right? The symbol at the 5th degree of Pisces, sextile square to both the moon and the sun, is adding friction to the full moon. It's the voice that says, but everyone contributes, but this is what community means. But if you don't show up, you're selfish. It's the guilt that makes rest feel like betrayal. It's the pressure that makes boundaries feel like abandonment. And this full moon is here to ask, what if showing up for yourself is a valid form of service? What if saying no to the church bazaar so you can finally tend to your own needs is actually the most responsible thing you can do? What if the community that requires you to abandon yourself isn't actually a community at all, you know? So just getting real on, you know, the time and energy and the people you're putting your energy into, you know? And life is not just about, you know, giving to receiving, but it's also not about people just draining your battery, right? While you can never fully charge. So the midheavens at the 19th degrees of Gemini, and the Sabian symbology for this is a large archaic, so old volume, and a large archaic volume, an old book, an ancient text, something that's been around for generations, something that contains wisdom from the past, knowledge that's been preserved, truth that's been recorded, stories that have been passed down, right? It's weighty, it's authoritative, and it's historical. And the 19th degree is sitting at the midhaven, the highest point in the chart, right? The place of public reputation and life direction. And with the Sabian symbol at the 19th degrees of Gemini, semi-sextile to the moon and quincunx to the sun, it's asking, what old story are you living by? What old archaic value has been dictating how you're supposed to show up in the world? What ancient texts told you that your career had to look a certain way, that success meant specific things, that your public persona required you to perform strength and hide struggle? What large, authoritative, seemingly unquestionable truth have you been following without ever asking if it's actually true for you? Gemini is about communication, information, learning and curiosity, but Gemini can also get trapped in the information itself, reading the book without questioning whether the book's right, following the text without asking who wrote it and why. At your midhaven, this large archaic volume is the career path you inherited, the definition of success you absorbed, the way you've been told to build your life in public. And as I said earlier, it's not necessarily bad, you know, but it may not be yours, you know. It might be someone else's story that you've been performing because you didn't know you were allowed to write your own. And this full moon in Cancer, with the moon touching this midhaven point and the sun, you know, pulling from the opposite direction in Capricorn, is creating tension between the old book, our old stories, our comfort zone, and, you know, our new story, our new way of living, between what the archaic value, our old life says we should do, and what your actual life is asking you to become, between the career you're supposed to build and the person you're actually turning into. And the invitation in this is that maybe it's time to close the old book, maybe it's time to stop living by someone else's text, maybe it's time to write your own value, your own story, your own rules, you know, one that's not archaic, not inherited, not prescribed, one that's actually finally truly yours, you know. So the Sabian symbols together, the priest performing the ceremony, the child carrying the shopping bag, the church bazaar, the large archaic value are showing you the same pattern from multiple angles. You've been performing ceremonies for everyone else whilst carrying weight that was never yours. You've been showing up at the bazaar whilst following an archaic value about how your life should look like. You've been the priest, the child, the volunteer, the follower, and you've been doing it all whilst abandoning the person who actually needed you the most, yourself. And this full moon saying enough, put the bag down, start performing the ceremony, leave the bazaar, close the old book, come home to yourself, write your own story, make your own vows, witness your own sacred union, choose yourself, finally choose yourself, actually for real, you know, choose you. So now I'm going to talk about the karmic wisdom, the generational pattern that we're being called to break at the time of this full moon in Cancer. So the karmic truth that this full moon's illuminating, putting a spotlight on, is that we didn't invent the pattern of abandoning ourselves to keep others comfortable. We inherited it. We absorbed it maybe from a mother who absorbed it from her mother, or primary caregiver who absorbed it from their primary caregiver, you know, who absorbed it from the society that said that you have to be this way or that way. Maybe you learnt it in a family system where emotional needs were inconvenient, where vulnerability was punished and seen as a sign of weakness, where love was something you had to earn by being useful, compliant, easy, you know, going along and not causing any trouble or anything like that, you know. And Cancer rules the mother line, it rules the feminine energy, and also ancestral inheritance. So the inheritance we get through our family line, through our societies, through our nations, and ultimately the emotional patterns passed down through generations of women who learn to smile whilst dying inside, who learn to nurture everyone except themselves. And this full moon in Cancer in the Nakshatra of the serpent is bringing all of that to the surface, so you can finally see it clearly enough to choose differently. So, you know, maybe your mother taught you something about what it means to be a woman in this world, if you're a woman, or your father taught you what it's like to be a man, or any primary caregiver did that, or maybe you had a lack of that kind of teaching, right? right? Maybe, you know, the feminine energy in your life taught you through their presence or their absence that, or maybe through what they said or couldn't say, that, you know, love is something that has to be earned. And even if like your mother or primary caregiver did their best, even if they was brilliant in so many ways, there were things they couldn't teach you because they never learned them themselves. Things about boundaries, about worthiness, about the difference between love and emotional labor. She taught you that your needs came last, that your feelings are too much, that love means sacrifice, that good women don't get angry. She taught you this not because she was cruel, but because that's what, you know, she was taught, they was taught. That's what, you know, generations of women, you know, learned, that we had to put a smile on, and men, you know, learned that, you know, couldn't show feelings and stuff. You know, being in line with what the world taught, that they needed their labor. If you was a woman, your hard work, you know, looking after the family, nurturing, but, you know, fearing the power of a woman, or, you know, fearing the power of a man that could show his like emotions as well. And whatever your pattern is, it's landed on you. Whatever, you know, your family baggage is, the pattern, the wound, the choice. And, you know, if you choose, you know, you can keep performing it, you can keep abandoning yourself, rejecting yourself, or whatever it is, you know, that you keep on doing, you know, being over functioning, over productive, trying to earn love through usefulness or any other ways you try to earn love. Or you can be the one who breaks, you know, your generational trauma. You can be the one who says no more, the one who chooses themselves even when it disappoints others. And this full moon in their Lisa, Nakshatra, is offering you the power to break the pattern. But breaking doesn't mean destroying it with anger, right? Breaking it means seeing it clearly, naming it honestly, and choosing differently with your whole heart. The karmic wisdom here is this: you don't heal generational trauma by understanding it. You heal it by stopping the pattern in your own body, by catching yourself mid-performance and choosing authenticity instead, by noticing when you're about to abandon yourself and staying present instead, right? Because this full moon is all about the ways that we neglect ourselves, abandon ourselves, and reject ourselves, right? That's the work. That's how you become the ancestor your, you know, bloodline needed, by catching yourself mid-performance and choosing authenticity instead. And here's the thing that sometimes goes unsaid about breaking generational patterns. It can feel like betrayal at first. It feels like you're letting everyone down because everyone in the system has been organized around your willingness to abandon yourself, or whatever it is that you don't show in yourself to please others, right? Everyone's been comfortable because you've been uncomfortable, and when you stop, when you choose yourself, the system has to reorganize, and some of them won't like it, but their discomfort with your healing is not your responsibility. You are allowed to break the cycle even if it makes people uncomfortable. You are allowed to choose yourself even if it disappoints your mother. You are allowed to be the first woman in your line who starts performing and starts living. That's not betrayal, that's liberation. This full moon is asking you to be the pattern breaker, the cycle stopper, the one who finally says, I love you, but I won't carry your pain anymore. I love you, but I won't abandon myself to make you comfortable. I love you, but I'm choosing me. And if that makes you the difficult one, brilliant. You're doing it right, okay guys? Because, you know, change isn't easy and people don't like it. They're like, comfort zone you, right? But, you know, remember, you're gonna fail on your way to success, the success of being more authentic. And remember, every failure is a step closer to you becoming who you are. It's not a sign to say give up, you know. It takes work, but you've got this, right? So to work with this energy at the time of the full moon in Cancer, I'm going to give you a free tier action steps for transformation. So immediately practice by, you know, naming one feeling you've been performing instead of having right now. today during this 72-hour window from the 31st of January to the 2nd of February, right? Stop and ask yourself during that time, what feeling have I been performing instead of actually action? What feeling have I been performing instead of actually having? Have you been performing fine when you're actually falling apart? Have you been performing grateful when you're actually resentful? Have you been performing strong when you're actually exhausted and burned out? Write it down, say it out loud. I've been performing whatever it is you've been performing, finish that sentence. But I actually feel, so be honest about what you actually feel. That's it. That's the practice. Not fixing it, not explaining it, just naming the truth. Just admitting that the version of you people see isn't the version that's actually living in your body. If tears come, let them. If anger comes, let it. You're not trying to change the feeling. You're just trying to stop lying about it. That's the immediate work. That's what changes things right now. So the next practice is the integration practice. Put down one bag you've been carrying, like the 5-year-old in the Sabin symbology, right, of the sun. Over the next 2 weeks, as this full moon energy integrates, identify one thing you've been carrying that was never your responsibility and consciously put it down. Maybe it's managing your mother's emotions or anyone else's emotions. Maybe it's fixing your partner's problems. Maybe it's believing you're responsible for everyone's comfort at the expense of your own. So here's how you do it. First, name it specifically. I've been carrying. So whatever it is you've been carrying, write it down or voice note it, voice record it. Secondly, acknowledge why you picked it up. Third, decide to put it down. I'm putting this down because, because it's killing me. Maybe because it was never mine. Because I deserve better. Whatever your because is. Then, and this is the hard part, actually stop doing the thing. And when people notice, when they're uncomfortable, when they're asked what's wrong, tell them the truth. I realise I've been carrying something that's not mine and I'm pulling it down. And yes, 9 times out of 10, guys, they're not going to like it. But you don't have to explain more than that. Just pull it down and let the system reorganise around you, around your absence from that role. And, being someone who has to do this, people's lives do typically go on fine. They are removed to their net supply of people who will do whatever it is you used to do for them, or it ends, the relationship ends and you move on to bigger and better things. And it's not about being harsh, it's about how much truth do you actually want in your life. Do you want to live your life for you and not in that selfish way? Of course, I believe in being loyal to those who are loyal to you. I mean, it's like when on the plane, you've got to put your own life mask on first. If someone isn't being loyal to you, why are you being loyal to them? Especially if they keep on disrespecting your boundaries and letting you down and stopping you from being who you're meant to be, right? But they get to be who they are, but they stop you from being who you are because you're trying to be loyal. So you just have to get real about what loyalty means, what respect means, and what self-love and care and healing actually means to you. And in terms of the third tier, the final tier, it's the long-term transformation, right? Building a life where your needs honor inconvenience, and this is the real work. You build a life not overnight, but gradually, day by day, habit by habit. Some days you got 2 minutes to work towards building your new life. Some days you got 5 or 10 hours, You deliberately build a life, not overnight, but gradually, deliberately, where your emotional needs aren't something you apologize for, where your boundaries ain't something you negotiate, where your feelings aren't something you manage for other people's comfort. You start choosing relationships where you're allowed to be complex, contradictory, emotional, human, and you're still loved. You start choosing work that doesn't require you to perform a version of yourself that doesn't exist. You start choosing yourself in small ways every day until those small ways become your new baseline. You stop saying yes when you mean to say no. You stop explaining your boundaries as if they're negotiable. You stop making yourself smaller so everyone else can feel bigger. You stop believing that your worth is conditional on your usefulness, on what you do for others, right? Or what you do in terms of your status, your job, whatever. And you start building a life that actually wants you in it, the real you, the whole you, the you who feels deeply and needs things and isn't always okay. This doesn't happen quickly. This doesn't happen without grief, but it happens. And on the other side of it is a life where you're not constantly exhausted from pretending, where you're not constantly resentful from giving what you don't have, because you're finally living your life instead of performing everyone else's version of what your life should be, right? So now to really drive it home, I'm going to go over, as well as give you some new self-reflection questions to ask yourself during the 28 days up until the next full moon, right? So which also happens to be a lunar eclipse as well. So this full moon is preparing you for that full moon that is gonna, you know, be lasting for 6 months. But I'm gonna do a special on that, so check it out in the playlist in a week. By the time you have this, it should be there within a week. So yeah, so you can ask yourself, where have I been performing emotional stability instead of actually feeling stable? What commitment have I been keeping that I never actually agreed to? What bag am I carrying that was never mine to carry? Who taught me that my needs were inconvenient, and am I still believing them? What would I choose if disappointing people wasn't a factor? Where am I defending the case just because I built it with my own hands? And if love doesn't require me to abandon myself, what kind of love am I actually available for? So these are questions that you can really use to, you know, get to the bottom of things before the solar new moon eclipse that's happening on the 17th of February, then the lunar full moon eclipse that's happening on the 3rd of March 2026, okay, so now I'm going to talk about zodiac guidance for all 12 sun, moon and rising signs. I suggest that you read your rising sign first, because that's where the energy lands in your actual chart. But if you know your sun sign and not your rising, read that instead. And if you're proper curious, read both, as well as your moon sign, because sometimes the overlap is where the real work lives, right? So Aries, this full moon lands in the 4th house of your home and family. The foundation you built your life on is being questioned. Maybe it's the literal home that doesn't fit anymore. Maybe it's the family patterns you've been defending. Maybe it's the version of safety that's actually been a cage. The words admitting what's not working, even when you're invested everything in making it work. Taurus, the full moon lands in your 3rd house of communication and the media environment. How you've been speaking versus what you actually been feeling is being exposed. The words you've been using to keep peace whilst dying inside are not working anymore. This full moon is asking you to say the true things, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it disrupts, even when people don't like it. Gemini, this full moon hits your 2nd house of worth and resources. How you've been valuing yourself is being illuminated. You've been giving your energy to situations that don't value you and calling it generosity when actually it's just abandoning yourself. This full moon asks what you're actually worth and whether you're willing to demand it. Cancer, this full moon is in your 1st house of identity and self. Everything you've been pretending about who you are is being illuminated, like the spotlight's being put on this, because it is your full moon, right? It's in your sign, and the mass can really slip. It's slipping, and what's underneath is either terrifying or liberating, you know, setting you free, depending on whether you're ready to start performing. The work isn't becoming someone new, it's admitting who you've actually been all along, Cancer. Leo, this full moon opposes your sun from your 12th house of the unconscious and hidden enemies. Everything you've been avoiding is surfacing. Everything you've been numbing is demanding attention. Everything you shoved down is coming up. This isn't punishment, it's integration. The only way out is through, and the only way through is by feeling, Leo. Virgo, this full moon lands in your 11th house of community and future vision. The version of belonging you've been performing isn't actually belonging. It's just, contorting, sort of like, the contortionists make themselves as small as possible, contorting their limbs to be small, right? So you've been trying to mold yourself to fit in. The friends or communities you have been loyal to don't actually see you, and this full moon is asking what it would mean to be chosen for who you are actually, instead of who you've been pretending to be. Libra, this full moon is in your 10th house of career and public reputation, whilst opposing planets in your 4th house of home and family. The tension between what the world needs from you and what you need for yourself is unbearable. You've been trying to do both, and this full moon saying you can't, not like this. Something's got to give, right? And it's probably the version of you who prioritizes everyone else's comfort and needs over your own survival by people pleasing, right? So this full moon, just like, Cancer as well and Pisces as well, is asking you to stop being so people-pleasery and codependent with others, or allowing others to be codependent on you or dependent on you. Scorpio, this full moon is in your 9th house of belief systems and meaning making, whilst planets oppose from your 3rd house of daily communication. The philosophy you have been building your life around is being tested by reality. What you believed about life and how it works isn't matching what's actually happening. The work is letting the old story die so a truer one can, emerge, come up, right? Sagittarius, this full moon in your 8th house of transformation and shared resources, whilst opposing planets in your 2nd house of self-worth. The emotional labour you've been doing in relationships is being exposed as unsustainable. You have been giving from depletion and wondering why you're exhausted. This full moon's here to show you that transformation requires resources, and you can't transform whilst you're running on empty, right? Capricorn, this full moon opposes your Sun, Venus, Mars and Mercury, all piled up in your sign. Your public persona versus your private emotional reality is at maximum tension, right? You have been achieving your way through pain, and this full moon's asking what it's actually costs you to do that, right? The breakthrough comes when you stop trying to earn worthiness and start admitting you're already enough. Aquarius, this full moon hits your 6th house of daily work and health routines. Your body's been screaming and you've been ignoring it. Your nervous system's been dysregulated and you have been called into productivity. This full moon's making the cost of over-functioning so visible to you that you can't pretend anymore. The work's not doing more, it's finally letting yourself rest. Pisces, this full moon is in your 5th house of creativity and self-expression, while Saturn and Neptune in your sign add confusion to everything. You're not sure what's real anymore, not sure what your responsibilities are versus what you have absorbed as if responsibilities. This full moon is asking you to create something that's just yours, not for anyone else, not to prove anything, just because it wants to exist. Just create for the sake of creating, let your inner child sing and dance on and see what comes out of you, and that's how you're going to remember who you are. So now bringing it all together and integrating this full moon in Cancer on the 1st of February, when the home you built becomes the life you actually want, right? So this super full moon, all in all, in Cancer at the 19th degrees of Cancer, isn't here to make you comfortable. It's here to make you honest. Honest about what you've been performing, honest about what you've been carrying, honest about what you've been defending, and what's actually been killing you, right? Honest about the difference between safety and control. Honest about the difference between love and labor, hard work, doing work that's not your own, between your home and being in a cage, being in a prison, right? So the priest performing the marriage ceremony, the child carrying the shopping bag, the church bazaar and the large archaic volume, these images are showing you the same pattern from different angles. You've been blessing commitments for everyone else whilst carrying carrying weight that was never yours. You've been sewing up at the bazaar, which is like a supermarket. They see it as a market, right? Supermarket sort of thing, whilst following an old book about how your life should look. So that's what other people tell you what your life should look like, right? You've been making everyone else's union sacred, everybody else's goals sacred, whilst abandoning your own needs, right? You've been performing the ceremony whilst the child inside of you struggles under the bags, under the weight, under carrying other people's loads, right? And you was never meant to hold these bags alone. And this full moon is saying it's time. It's time to put the bags down, time to start performing the ceremony, time to leave the bazaar, the marketplace, the hustle and bustle of what everybody else tells you to do, you know, trying to just live up to what social media and societal expectations, family expectations, lovers expectations, friends expectations, right? And it's time to close the old book, and it's time to witness your own sacred union with yourself, because I'm a great believer that the number one relationship each person needs to be having in their life is with themselves. You know, so time to witness your own sacred union, the one between who you've been and who you're becoming, between the version that survived and the version of you that's ready to live. Time to make vows to yourself that you actually want to keep. Time to commit to your emotional truth, even when it disappoints people. Time to choose yourself with the same fierce devotion you've been giving everyone else, right? And the Cancer Capricorn axis will always create tension between what you need emotionally and what the world demands practically, between soft and hard, private and public, feeling and achieving. But the goal's not eliminating the tension. The goal's stopping the lie that you can do both by abandoning yourself. The goal's admitting that you can't build anything sustainable long term on a foundation of self-betrayal, right? The goal's choosing your emotional truth as non-negotiable and letting everything else reorganize around that. This might mean disappointing people. It probably will, right? It might mean disrupting systems that have been organized around your willingness to overfunction and do too much. It definitely will, right? It definitely will mean disrupting things, getting outside of the comfort zone. It can mean being the difficult one, the disappointing one, the one who didn't turn out how they were expected. This almost certainly will happen because, as I said, people don't like change, right? Especially ourselves, but that's okay. It's better than okay, as long as you're, you know, being your authentic self, nurturing your inner child and doing no harm to yourself and others, and not the harm people will say you're doing because you're not doing what they want to do, right? But harm is in physically hurting them or something like that, you know, mind gaming them and stuff like that. The work is freeing yourself. That's the liberation. That's how you become the ancestor that your bloodline needed, the one who finally said no more and meant it. Over the next 2 weeks, as this full moon integrates, you're going to feel everything, the grief of what you have been defending, the anger at what it cost you, the fear of what it means to choose differently, the release and relief of finally telling the truth, the exhaustion of holding it all in, the hope of what becomes possible when you start performing and start living. Feel it all. Don't make it mean something too fast. Don't spiritualize it before you actually felt it. Just let yourself have your own experience without immediately managing it for everyone else. The Elise and that Sakra, the serpent, the Kundalini, the coiled power waiting to awaken is offering you transformation if you're willing to burn through what's false. And remember, this is not gentle transformation, not comfortable transformation. It's the kind that strips you down to essence, the kind that forces you to feel everything you've been avoiding, the kind that turns poison into medicine. If you've been brave enough to drink it, you know, you're not broken, you're not too much, you're not failing, you're waking up, you're seeing clearly, you're choosing yourself, and yeah, that's uncomfortable. Yeah, that disrupts the things that, you know, have been your comfort zone, but you don't and you didn't come here to be comfortable, right? you know, or at least comfortable as in other people's version of comfortable. It's about being comfortable in a version that doesn't mean your own, you know, denial, your self-denial of your actual true needs, right? You came here to break cycles, heal lineages, not by doing everybody's work, but by doing your own work, right? And building a life that actually wants you. This full moon's giving you everything you need to exactly do that. Now, the only question is, guys, are you willing? You know, are you willing to let this full moon energy work through you? As this full moon is here to show us where we've been using safety as a prison, as I said all that time ago in the introduction, right? And where we've been calling control, protection and fear, intuition, and where the walls that we've built to keep the pain out have now become our prison, locking us in from our true self-expression. You know, it's all about self-acceptance and not self-abandonment. So yeah, guys, that's the end of this super full moon in Cancer analysis on the 1st of February. I'm Imani, your holistic karmic astrological life coach. Take care and see you next time.